Hello, I'm your host, Brian Callahan. Will the Seattle City Council pass a tax on big businesses to deal with the COVID-19 crisis? What will it take to repair or replace the West Seattle Bridge after its surprising closure? And what impact would an eviction moratorium have on renters and landlords in Seattle? Councilmembers Tammy Morales and Alex Pedersen will answer these questions and the ones you're sending in too, next on Council Edition.
We cannot keep relying on our neighbors, on you and I, to fund the things that we need with increased property and sales tax.
Well, this transportation benefit district is expiring, and we need to have funding for buses.
All that and more coming up next on City Inside Out, Council Edition.
And they are joining in remotely, Councilmembers Pedersen and Morales. Thanks very much for taking part in this. I want to start with a major issue the Council's Budget Committee is considering right now, a 1.3% tax on payroll for any Seattle company with a payroll greater than $7 million. Exceptions would include public agencies, nonprofits, grocery stores too. About 800 businesses or so would be affected. The plan is to send $500 cash payments to 100,000 people in need once a month for 4 months to weather the coronavirus crisis. Councilmember Morales, you are co-sponsoring this legislation with Councilmember Sawant. Why this tax on big businesses and why now?
Well, as you said, because we've got several different crises happening right now. We know that we have the underlying homelessness emergency, which has been exacerbated by the public health crisis that we're in right now. Additionally, we have the public health crisis itself. We know lots of people have been laid off. The Seattle Times is reporting this morning that 1 million jobless claims have been filed. And so we know that people are in desperate need of cash assistance. Mm-hmm. The mechanism here is not a new conversation. We have talked about the need for progressive revenue as a way to more equitably fund the things that we need in the city. But the need is certainly much more acute now, given that there are so many people who are experiencing financial crisis due to the COVID-19 infections that we're experiencing in the community. And we thought this was an important time to try to provide some cash assistance to people to help them weather the next several months.
Right. Thanks very much for that. Councilmember Pedersen, you recently wrote an op-ed in the Seattle Times with Matthew Gardner, one of Jay Inslees' economic advisors, about this big business tax. You laid out 10 reasons to oppose this plan. Can you summarize for us your concerns here, please?
Yes. And first of all, thanks for having us on the show, Brian, and shout out to District 4 residents who might be listening now. I share the view that we are in an unprecedented public health crisis. This pandemic is horrible for so many people, and this is leading to an economic crisis. And I think one of the specifics about this economic crisis is that employers in Seattle have been furloughing, laying off people, reducing their hours. And because of that occurring, and a recession that we are in the midst of here is not the time for a new tax on employers. I think it's not good timing. I think we don't know what the consequences will be of such a new tax, such as residents who would be getting this financial assistance, whether it would impact their eligibility for more sustainable federal programs that are being provided, because if we give cash assistance, then they could hit an income limit and be taken off of other assistance is one concern. Yep. So I'm glad the federal government is stepping up and providing relief and stimulus, and the city's been providing relief in other ways as well.
Okay. Councilmember Morales, maybe you can respond to some of Councilmember Pedersen's concerns and also a reaction from one of our viewers here. Randy brings up this fact that Seattle had this fight over a big business tax in 2018 with a lot of public pushback. He tweeted this, Councilmember Morales, if the Seattle people don't want a jobs tax, why would you abuse the emergency powers to force one through? That's the question. If you could respond to that, maybe some of Councilmember Pedersen's concerns too, please.
Sure. Well, I will say with regards to the stimulus package, we know that the financial sector just got a $2 trillion bailout. The small business funds that are coming from the federal government to provide assistance to our neighborhood businesses are not actually reaching them. They're going instead to the Ritz-Carlton and to, large corporations. So I would say that relying on the feds to bail us out is not a smart strategy. We're going to have to figure out how we provide help to our neighbors here on a local level with a local solution. This conversation isn't new. I will grant that. We've been talking about this for a long time, even as recently as a couple months ago, trying to have this pass in Olympia, where, by the way, big business was supportive of this idea of taxing. Taxing large corporations to help pay for the services that we have to provide at the local level.
Yeah, on a regional level with that tax. That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, the need is great, and we cannot keep relying on our neighbors, on you and I, to fund the things that we need with increased property and sales tax. Look, big business will tell you there's never a good time to tax them. But you can't say that to, our neighbors who are going to bed hungry, who are losing sleep over how they're going to pay their bills, our small businesses who are worried about how their employees are going to be able to pay their bills. So it's clear that we have a need. The question is, how do we solve it? And we're not going to solve it by cutting the programs that are the most vulnerable in our community rely on, like food stamps and subsidized childcare and, utility assistance. And, these are measures that are taken that are very punitive for the most vulnerable in our communities. And those kinds of austerity measures are not where we need to be putting our energy. We need to double down on finding a way to pay for these services and more. And the way that we do that is by asking the largest corporations to be good neighbors and to help support the public coffers in these times when, as Councilmember Pedersen said, sales tax and B&O tax revenue is down.
Right.
We rely on those taxes far too much.
Right.
I think, made a very compelling case on Wednesday for why we need to diversify the way we bring funding into the city, because we are 60% reliant on taxes that are down, and we need to find a different way to do this.
Thank you for bringing all those different pieces of this up. Councilmember Pedersen, maybe you can respond to part of that, and also a question we got in for you on this topic. John tweeted this: Councilmember Pedersen, COVID recovery is going to take a lot of resources. There's also massive inequality in this city. What specific progressive revenue sources do you suggest we use to properly fund economic recovery while ensuring our communities stay healthy and housed? Councilmember Pedersen.
Sure. So one of the big differences here is that the federal government can have deficits, whereas the city government cannot. So the $2 trillion provided by the federal government, only $500 million of that went to businesses, and those were in the form of loans that need to be paid back. So there's no bailout in that $2 trillion. Secondly, nobody's suggesting cutting city government programs that provide direct services to vulnerable populations. It's true that we now have a city budget deficit, but we can deal with that using our emergency funds, and we can perhaps roll back some pay raises for the highest paid city government employees, but not cutting service. I also do not want to cut services to the most vulnerable. So there's no austerity measures being proposed here. The money for this proposed payroll tax is going to things like converting natural gas in homes to electricity. So it's not really, after the first year, that's one of the major components of it. So it's not providing direct service to vulnerable people. So nobody's suggesting that. I support providing more funding for that.
Do you support
the federal government is the one that's going to be providing the funds.
I just wanted to ask, is there any sort of progressive revenue measure you would support? I think that's part of the question too.
I would support a statewide income tax. That's, I think, the way that we can target those who are truly doing well and they need to pay more their fair share. And doing it so it's not just the city by itself. Otherwise, we end up disincentivizing people to be here.
Okay. Thank you very much, both of you, for your back and forth on that. I'd like to move on to another topic, another major one here, the West Seattle Bridge, the surprising closure of that bridge, at least through this year and next, due to cracking, safety concerns. Councilmember Pedersen, you chair the Transportation and Utilities Committee. You co-hosted a town hall event on YouTube very recently about this. I had the pleasure of moderating that event. Here's one question that came in we did not get to. So far, it does not seem as there is a sense of urgency in the city government, given the importance of the West Seattle Bridge as an arterial. What is the city doing to ensure that its repair or replacement is being prioritized and pursued with an appropriate sense of urgency? John, thank you very much for that question. And I know, Councilmember Pedersen, you've been working on auditing some of our major bridge projects in the city. Talk about that and this whole idea of having some urgency to the West Seattle Bridge project.
Yes, thank you for that question. So the 100,000 people in West Seattle have an extreme hardship with the bridge suddenly closing. I think there was a sense of urgency in shutting down the bridge for public safety and for creating alternative routes very quickly. And Councilmember Lisa Herbal, who represents West Seattle, has been a passionate advocate for her constituents on this. The director of the Seattle Department of Transportation, this is his number one priority in dealing with this. The difficulty is that the structural engineering of the bridge, it needs to be assessed very carefully to make sure that we can repair it quickly. But there has to be additional testing done. But that is being prioritized right now.
Okay. Thank you very much for that.
You're right. It brings up this other question about what is going on with the other bridges. How much are we investing in our infrastructure citywide? And so that's right. Yesterday, I asked the city auditor to perform an audit on the bridges throughout the city to confirm their conditions and also to assess whether we're investing enough in maintenance in our bridges.
Lots still ahead with that. Thanks for bringing that up. Councilmember Morales, you serve on the Transportation Committee too. And let me ask you another question from that meeting that came in. Here's what we have. What is the plan to address dangerous cut-through traffic on the side streets of Highland Park, especially 11th, 12th, Portland, and Kenyon, where the huge amount of detour traffic will make a bad situation worse? Vanessa, thank you for that question. I'm asking this, Councilmember Morales, because I know it's an issue in your district too, not just in West Seattle, this cut-through traffic, the detours, et cetera.
Yeah, that's right. So obviously our first concern here is for public safety, right? So we have to keep the bridge closed and we need to keep the lower bridge free for emergency responders so they can get in and out of West Seattle if that's necessary. And so consequently, there is any number of challenges for people to get around. What that means for folks in my district is that in Georgetown, for example, they're already seeing an increased traffic. So there's worries about speed, about pedestrian safety, about air quality, and really folks are about, as we open back up and people start to, go back to work or do the things that they need to do, that 100,000 people in West Seattle will mean that many more cars coming through the neighborhood to get. These are obviously huge concerns. People need to know what the plan is. And so I will be working closely with Councilmember Pedersen and with FDOT to anticipate the challenges he is going to have, neighborhoods there will have, and try to put in place whatever we can to mitigate the traffic flow and to make sure that our neighbors are safe there.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to switch back to the coronavirus crisis, and I want to stick with you, Councilmember Morales, specifically our city's response to homelessness. I know you've been working to change the way Seattle's navigation team responds to unauthorized encampments. You're working on a proposal that would put some strict new guidelines on if and when so-called sweeps could happen. I want to talk about your plan and why you're proposing this, please.
Sure. Well, I will say that former Seattle Human Rights Commissioner, I've been advocating that we stop this practice for a very long time. As I know, lots of other people, I don't think that removing people from encampments, unless there is a very literal, safety obstruction, then we need to let people stay where they are. There's the only stability they have, and we all know that we don't have the sufficient sanitation options for them. We have not served our homeless neighbors as well as we should have been, and moving them from one side of the street to the other isn't going to help that.
Okay.
Right now, particularly, declaration from the Center Control is not to be moving people from encampments because we risk exposing them and exposing the rest of the community to infection. So we need to be really careful about letting people stay where they are so that they can, as much protection as they can get from that sort of a situation.
Got it. Thank you very much for that.
That said.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. A few issues with the back and forth there. I wanted to, if I could, draw in Councilmember Pedersen, who I know has been working with his role as Transportation and Utilities Chair with SPU, which is one of the many agencies involved with these hygiene stations that are rolling around. And Councilmember Pedersen, we're not just talking about issues with COVID here. We're talking about some new concerns among our homeless population when it comes to hepatitis A. So talk to me, if you could, about that rollout of the hygiene stations and maybe your concerns, thoughts about how the city's responding to our homelessness issue in the middle of the COVID crisis.
Yes, thank you. So homelessness, before COVID, homelessness was the number one concern of residents throughout the city and a priority for the city council. And we created the Regional Homeless Authority to get better outcomes for our homeless neighbors. And the navigation team, just as a reminder who they are for the audience, I mean, they're a hardworking team of dedicated city employees from various departments: human services, police, parks, public utilities, and they engage with people experiencing homelessness, try to connect them to services. I agree with Councilmember Morales. We do not have enough shelter, and COVID, because of the social distancing requirements, has reduced our capacity even more.
Yep. And
this brings up the need to have these portable bathrooms and hand washing stations. And the city government has deployed additional ones. I think they've gotten feedback from the council members and community leaders of the need for more. In District 4, they opened up the library in the university district so that the bathrooms are accessible. And so we want to keep monitoring that and make sure that during this crisis, we have that. Of course, that's not a long-term solution. Long-term solution is more housing, getting people into a permanent place of housing so they can get the services they need and get their lives back in order.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I want to make sure that I move to another issue here. And Councilmember Pedersen, I want to stick with you one more time. Talking about our city's Transportation Benefit District. Voters approved it in 2014 to provide additional transit service. It's been very popular. Transit has been used very frequently here in Seattle. This TBD, as it's called, is up for renewal this year. The council has not put this on the ballot as of yet, and there are a few challenges here. You've got ridership way down for Metro during the COVID crisis. So is the TBD really needed? You've got concerns in terms of how the money comes into this. Is that still legal after the yes vote for $30 car tabs? How are you approaching this?
Sure. Well, Seattleites love their transit. It's a priority for me to move the most people as efficiently as possible. It's good for the economy. It's good for workers. It's affordable. It's clean. And so I am optimistic that when we do get out of this crisis and the economy restarts in a safe way, that transit will be one of the backbones of our restarting of the economy. So we want to be ahead of that. We want to think ahead and know that, well, this Transportation Benefit District is expiring and we need to have funding for buses.
Right.
It currently provides 350,000 service hours. And with West Seattle Bridge closing, we need even more buses so that we can get people from West Seattle to downtown, for example.
Right.
So my plan is to have to be ready to renew it as early as this November,
Okay.
which means we have to put it on the ballot in early August for a November ballot.
For a November vote. Thank you. Councilmember Morales, just in your role on Transportation Committee, I wonder if you can weigh in here. Is now the right time to pursue putting the Transportation Benefit District on the ballot? You've got concerns, of course, about added taxation during the COVID crisis with so many people without their jobs. A lot of different challenges here. Your thoughts on the TBD and what's next?
Sure. Well, I think it does, again, illustrate how reliant we are on property and sales tax. And when revenue is down, it puts so many of our services in jeopardy. That said, we have to start moving toward the planning for recovery. And that does mean that when people need to get back to work, and even now for folks who are using the bus, for essential workers who are getting to work, it's really important that we have the service hours. We're going to have to dramatically increase routes, particularly to West Seattle, so that there's much more accessibility. So I think we're going to have some challenges ahead, but we are really thinking about how to do this in a way that we are able to recover and serve all of our community members in a much more equitable way. So we're going to have to move forward with some of these plans that we had in place before and make sure that we are capturing the ability to serve our neighbors best, so that they are well served when it's time to go back to work.
Thank you very much for that. Councilmember Morales, I'll stay with you. And I wanted to talk about the eviction moratorium the council is working towards right now. The hope is to offer protections for renters up to 6 months after the COVID state of emergency is over. To be clear, this is not the city offering to pay your rent. This is a protection in eviction court here. But I want your thoughts on this, how you think an eviction moratorium will impact renters and landlords in Seattle, please.
Sure. Well, so this is important because we know that folks have lost their jobs. They're not able to pay rent. And it's going to be important to provide some relief to people. It is, again, demonstrating how fragile our system is. If folks can't pay rent, then landlords can also not pay their mortgages. And so it just sets up this system of, kind of cascading problems that our community is having.
Yeah.
Seattle was the first city in the country to pass a resolution for a residential and commercial rent and mortgage moratorium.
Right.
We passed it unanimously, and Governor Inslee has used his powers to protect our neighbors. But we know that there is a lot more work to do. Yeah. It's going to be important because just because you don't pay rent now doesn't mean it's not due. And so what we need in addition to this eviction protection is just a cancellation of the debt altogether.
Okay.
Been organizing with elected leaders from other cities to call on our governors, to call on our congressional delegation to put these in place, put these moratoriums in place at every level. And this is important because we're already seeing attempts at, kind of disaster gentrification. We know that elders in the central area and in South Seattle are being harassed to sell their homes. So we have to be really intentional about making sure that we don't sort of grease the wheels for displacement, and that we are doing everything we can to ensure our neighbors are protected. And now that doesn't mean that you just stop paying rent. I want to be really clear. If you can't pay your rent, you need to talk to your landlord. But we want to make sure that you can't get evicted. And we're also working on language that would set up some relief so that if you can't pay rent, then your landlord has an option to seek assistance to cover their mortgage payment. We're still working on that. It is not final, but we're hoping to be able to introduce something like that soon.
Thank you very much for that. Councilmember Pedersen, if you want to talk about the eviction moratorium, please do. I'm trying to jam in as many topics as we can. And I thought there was a very important piece, if you would mind switching gears with me. City Light right now, a lot of work going on around there, following some of the concerns from customers about getting overcharged, having their service shut down. A report on an audit recently came out. Could you talk to me about what you're working on to implement some changes at City Light, please?
Of course, yeah. So thanks to Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda, an audit was launched when a lot of customers were receiving unusually high bills from Seattle City Light, and it was due in part to the utility instituting some new customer billing software and systems. And so the city auditor was able to make about 16 recommendations, and City Light, which is led by a relatively new leader here for Seattle, Deborah Smith, who's highly experienced utility leader. She's already started instituting those recommendations. She hopes to have the rest of them done well before the end of this year.
Okay.
So our committee will be monitoring that, making sure they are making those recommendations to basically empower frontline staff to solve problems for customers. That's one of the major themes of that audit.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We need to wrap up the show. I can give you about a minute apiece here. I'm going to go out on a limb and say dealing with a massive public health crisis was not on the council member job description when you ran last fall. But I'm thinking about this right now. What are you telling people in your districts who are concerned about their physical health, maybe concerned about their financial future? Many have lost their jobs. Just a broad question to finish. How is this city going to recover? Councilmember Morales, would you take the first crack at that, please?
Sure. Well, you're absolutely right, Brian. I never anticipated that my first 100 days would be spent dealing with this. Part of the challenge for us right now is that committees aren't meeting because of social distancing and because of the, inability to have public comment. So we've really had to adjust our work plans.
Yeah.
Hasn't changed my centering community voices. So we're working hard to make sure that we continue talking about how we are going to build community wealth in our city, and that conversation is even more important now in light of the fact that so many people we're all staring down the barrel of a very long recession. So we're just encouraging people to stay home. We will figure out how to recover in a way that is just and equitable. But right now, what's really important is that we protect our personal health and protect our community health. And that means that we stay home, we wash our hands. Please don't go play basketball. Don't go to the park. It's hard. And, the other thing I will say is we need to be thinking about our mental health as well. So making sure that we are at least reaching out, making phone calls to our friends and family and, staying in touch as best we can that way.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Pedersen, some final thoughts here about getting Seattle back on track. Give you a minute.
The constituents we represent are on our minds, and we care about them and want them to stay home, stay safe. It seems to be working. We are bending the curve. There is light at the end of the tunnel, so stay strong. Keep washing your hands. Seattle has a history of resiliency, and I share Councilmember Morales' goal of preventing displacement and making sure we come out of this even stronger.
Okay. Thank you both very much for your involvement in this show. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you next time on Council Edition.